What happens when the King of England finally draws a line in the sand and says, enough? When a father turns against his own son and daughter-in-law in the most public and devastating way possible. Tonight, we dive into the decision that has sent shockwaves not only through the royal household, but across the world. King Charles has officially stripped Harry and Meghan of their titles, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. A move many said he would never dare to make. A move Meghan Markle reportedly believed was beyond the bounds of possibility. And yet, it happened. Imagine the silence that followed that announcement. Meghan, who built her entire post-royal identity around those words, Duchess of Sussex, suddenly rendered powerless. Can you picture her, the woman who once swept into royal life with a Hollywood sparkle, now staring into the abyss of losing the very thing that gave her international leverage? For Meghan, those titles were not just ceremonial. They were power. They were branding. They were the golden seal of legitimacy in a world where fame is currency. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. So here's the shocking question for you. What happens to a woman who bet everything on a crown she thought she could control? Do you think Meghan underestimated the one man who could take it all away? From the moment Harry and Meghan stepped down in 2020, the monarchy seemed to play a cautious game. They were allowed to leave, to experiment with a new life, to carve out a progressive role beyond palace walls. But Charles, then still Prince of Wales, didn't pull the trigger. He didn't remove their titles. Why? Because, at that moment, the family still hoped for reconciliation. A door was left open. A fragile bridge still existed. But bridges burn, and patience runs out. Think about it. For years, the couple has been accused of leveraging their royal status for financial gain. Netflix deals, book advances, podcasts, even public speaking engagements, all subtly tied to their identity as the Sussexes. It wasn't Harry Windsor and Meghan Markle signing those contracts. It was the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Does that sound accidental or calculated? And here's where the irony cuts deep. Meghan reportedly saw those titles as her insurance policy. No matter how ugly the media battles got, no matter how strained things were with the palace, she believed Charles wouldn't dare touch them. To her, the monarchy needed to appear dignified, above petty punishments. She was sure her Hollywood power move was secure. But the king, known for his patience, also carries a ruthless streak when the crown is on the line. And patience eventually turns to resolve. Now, let's pause and ask, why does this matter now, in this exact moment? Why not 2 years ago? Why not after the Oprah interview, or Harry's bombshell memoir, or the Netflix documentary? Why did Charles wait? Now here's a question for you. Without those titles, would the deals have been the same? Would Netflix have spent hundreds of millions on their documentary series if it was just Harry Windsor and Meghan Markle from Suits? Would Spotify have gambled on a podcast hosted by a former cable actress and her husband? Or was it the allure of royalty, the mystique of Sussex, that sealed the contracts? Because if we're being brutally honest, Meghan understood something many didn't. Titles sell. Titles carry weight. Titles are irresistible in Hollywood, where everyone is scrambling for the next big spectacle. And Meghan, brilliant strategist that she was, leaned into that reality. She saw the Duchess brand not as a relic of the past, but as the future of her empire. But here's the twist. Charles knew. The palace knew. Whispers suggest that aides and insiders had caught wind of Meghan's true strategy, to spin the Sussex name into a sprawling global brand. We're talking about merchandise, media, endorsements, even lifestyle ventures. Imagine Duchess-branded fashion lines, Duchess wellness empires, Duchess-led productions. It wasn't about public service anymore. It was about market share. And this is where the betrayal cut deepest. Because when Meghan and Harry stepped down, they promised to honor the values of the monarchy. They promised not to exploit their positions for commercial gain. And yet, time and again, those titles became the centerpiece of their Hollywood negotiations. Do you see the contradiction? The very thing they claimed to be leaving behind, the crown, became their biggest selling point. Now let's go even deeper. Imagine Meghan's vision board. Contracts pinned with the words Sussex, highlighted in bold. Strategy sessions with agents and publicists, dissecting how best to position the Duchess in Hollywood. Pitches that weren't about Meghan Markle the individual, but Meghan Markle the Duchess. The royal glow was the product. The palace crest was the logo. The monarchy was the brand, and Meghan was determined to cash it in. And here's where the emotional punch lands. To Charles, to William, to the monarchy, this wasn't just exploitation. It was desecration. The royal titles aren't commodities. They're responsibilities. They're supposed to represent service, not self-interest. So when the king realized Meghan's plan wasn't about bridging worlds, but about building a Hollywood empire, he snapped. He knew he couldn't let it continue. And yet, here's the cruel irony. Meghan thought she was untouchable. She believed the monarchy would never risk the backlash of stripping her titles. She saw Charles as too cautious, too concerned with optics, too bound by tradition to act. She believed she could play both sides, rejecting royal duty while keeping royal privilege. But she miscalculated. Because Charles may be patient, but he's also ruthless when the crown is threatened. And when he exposed Meghan's Hollywood master plan, it wasn't just about stopping her. It was about sending a message to the world. The monarchy is not for sale. So now I ask you, what happens to Meghan's empire when the golden seal is ripped away? Can she still command Hollywood's attention without the Duchess title shimmering beside her name? Or was the entire master plan doomed the moment Charles decided to act? Because the breaking point, the moment Charles shifted from patient father to decisive king, was closer than Meghan ever realized. And once it arrived, nothing could stop it. But what pushed Charles to the edge? What was the final straw that made him decide the titles had to go? That's where the story takes its sharpest turn yet. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started quietly. A whisper here, a murmur there. At first, it was just speculation. Will Charles really strip them of their titles? Most people thought he wouldn't. Too harsh, too divisive, too unroyal. But behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was different. The patience was thinning. The experiment was failing. The dignity of the crown was bleeding away. And then, the breaking point arrived. Let me paint the picture for you. In the months leading up to Charles's shocking decision, reports began swirling about Meghan's Hollywood negotiations. Word was leaking out that major studios and agencies were being pitched projects tied directly to her royal identity. Not Meghan Markle the actress, not Meghan the humanitarian, but Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. Think about that for a moment. Every deal, every presentation, allegedly tied back to those two words, Duchess. Sussex. The crown. Now here's the question, where's the line? At what point does a royal title stop being heritage and start being a business tool? Charles, a man raised his entire life to protect the dignity of the monarchy, must have asked himself that same thing. And the answer was clear. Meghan had crossed it. But this wasn't just about contracts. This was about loyalty. You see, for the monarchy, titles aren't just honors, they're trust. They represent the bond between the crown and the people. And when Meghan allegedly turned those titles into bargaining chips for Hollywood power, Charles saw not just disobedience, but betrayal. Let's rewind to an insider account. Rumors suggest that Meghan's team had circulated pitch decks to corporate partners. These weren't simple proposals. They were glossy, detailed, branded with royal language. The pitch wasn't Meghan Markle, former actress. It was the Duchess of Sussex, offering prestige, exclusivity, and a royal edge to anyone willing to pay. Imagine the fury in the palace when those whispers reached Charles's desk. And here's where the emotional weight lands hardest. For Charles, this wasn't just about Meghan. It was about his late mother, Queen Elizabeth. The Queen had made sacrifices, endured decades of scrutiny, and held the monarchy together through storms. To see her legacy commodified, to see the crown reduced to a marketing tool, was intolerable. Stripping the titles wasn't vengeance. It was protection. Now picture the moment Charles made the call. Advisors warned him of backlash. Critics would say he was cruel, even vindictive. The world would scream about punishing Harry and Meghan. But Charles was unmoved. He'd reached the breaking point. And sometimes, when a monarch makes a decision, it isn't about popularity. It's about survival. Here's a question for you. If your family name was being used for profit, against your wishes, would you allow it? Would you let your identity be twisted into someone else's business strategy? Or would you put your foot down, no matter the cost? That's the choice Charles faced. And once he realized Meghan's Hollywood ambitions were inseparable from her Duchess identity, there was no turning back. The crown could not coexist with the brand. But this decision wasn't just about Meghan. It was also about Harry. The breaking point revealed something deeper: Harry's torn loyalty. He stood by Meghan, of course, but insiders suggest he pleaded for compromise. He reportedly begged Charles not to take the titles, not to humiliate them so publicly, for a father to reject his son's plea. Can you imagine the emotional weight of that moment? And yet, Charles still did it. That was the breaking point. A son's tears, a daughter-in-law's rage, a father's resolve. The monarchy would not be for sale. Now pause for a moment. Think about Meghan in that instant. She had always believed Charles wouldn't dare. She thought the crown was too cautious, too bound by tradition to act. She thought she had more leverage. But in that moment, she was wrong. Completely wrong. The irony is almost poetic. Meghan, who believed she was in control of the narrative, discovered that the monarchy, when pushed to its limit, still held the ultimate power. But here's the cruel twist. This breaking point didn't just divide father and son. It split the entire royal family. William and Anne were said to support the decision. Others were uneasy. The monarchy itself fractured further in the process of trying to heal. And that's where things spiral even more. Because what came after the breaking point wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't peace. It was escalation. Because when Harry's reaction collided with Meghan's shock, the story twisted into a whole new storm. One that Charles couldn't contain, and one Meghan never believed she'd face. But Harry's response to the breaking point, that's where this story explodes into its next chapter. And no one saw it coming. For Harry, the news hit like a lightning bolt. The titles he had once taken for granted, the identity he carried from birth, were suddenly ripped from his grasp. And yet, unlike Meghan, Harry had grown up understanding the weight of the crown. He knew the monarchy's rules, the expectations, and the consequences of defying them. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are worlds apart. Picture him in that moment, standing somewhere between disbelief and desperation. He had married Meghan knowing the risks, knowing the scrutiny, knowing the rules. But did he ever imagine that the ultimate punishment would come in this form? That the very titles that had symbolized their independence would be yanked away? Could Harry have anticipated the depth of his father's resolve, or the cold, calculated nature of Charles's move? Harry's loyalty to Meghan was unwavering. He had walked away from duty, family, and country to support her. He had built a life on the idea that love and independence could coexist with royal heritage. But now, those ideals were under siege. The king's decision wasn't just about the titles. It was a symbolic message that the monarchy would not be manipulated, commodified, or leveraged for personal gain. And Harry had to watch as the very woman he married, the Duchess he loved, processed the magnitude of what had just occurred. Emotions ran high. Insider reports suggest Harry experienced a cocktail of fury, fear, and frustration. There was the anger of seeing his wife, the Duchess of Sussex, shocked into silence. There was fear for their future, personal, professional, and financial. And there was frustration at being caught between two worlds: the royal family he was born into and the Hollywood empire he had attempted to help build. What's more, Harry's desperation wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. He understood that without the titles, Meghan's Hollywood leverage diminished. Without the crown's seal of legitimacy, the brand that they had meticulously built began to fray. And Harry, who had always been protective of Meghan, saw the very foundation of their plans cracking before his eyes. But here's where it gets even more complex. Harry's loyalty created tension within the family. Reports suggest that William and other senior royals struggled with the dynamic. Harry was caught between defending Meghan's ambitions and acknowledging the reality that the monarchy and Charles's decision was absolute. Every plea, every argument, every attempt at negotiation was met with the stark truth: the titles were gone. Permanently. And yet, Harry didn't retreat quietly. He pushed. He argued. He tried to find a compromise that could save both face and future opportunities. He reportedly made calls, sent messages, and tried to leverage his public platform to soften the impact. But Charles's resolve was ironclad. The monarchy's dignity outweighed the son's pleas. And Harry realized, painfully, that no matter how much love or loyalty he had for Meghan, some lines could not be crossed. This moment marked a turning point. Harry had always been the royal rebel, the one willing to challenge the system, to question tradition, to step out of line. But this was different. This wasn't a gentle nudge against protocol. This was a definitive strike against their combined power and ambition. It was a declaration that the monarchy still held the ultimate authority, regardless of celebrity influence or media attention. Now consider the emotional tension this created between Harry and Meghan. Harry had always been protective, often acting as the buffer between Meghan and the royal machinery. But Meghan's shock, coupled with Harry's desperation, created a volatile mix. They were united in love, yet divided by reality. One was grappling with the loss of status and influence, while the other confronted the unyielding authority of a father and king. And here's the real question for you. If you were Harry, would you fight to preserve what remains of your identity? Would you challenge your father's authority, or accept that the monarchy's decision is final, no matter the personal cost? It's a choice that pits family loyalty against personal ambition, love against legacy, emotion against duty. But even as Harry's desperation reached its peak, Meghan remained silent. Her shock was so profound that it overshadowed even the prince's attempts to navigate the crisis. That silence, though, was louder than any argument. It spoke volumes, disbelief, anger, maybe even the first inkling that their carefully laid plans could collapse entirely. And in that silence, Charles's power was undeniable. The king's decision had not only removed titles, but had shifted the balance of control. Harry could advocate, plead, and strategize all he wanted, but the monarchy's authority had been asserted in the most visible and irreversible way possible. Yet, even in desperation, Harry remained steadfast. His love for Meghan was unwavering, but the reality was stark. The kingdom had spoken, and the Duchess title, the very cornerstone of their strategy, was gone. And now comes the moment that would shock Meghan more than anything. Because Harry's response, his desperation, and his unwavering support collided with Meghan's own shock in a way that no one outside their inner circle could have predicted. But Meghan's silence, and what she did next in the aftermath of Harry's reaction, sets the stage for revelations that would stun the world. And no one saw it coming. Meghan's reaction to the stripping of her title was a study in disbelief. For a woman who had always projected confidence, poise, and control, this was the moment that unraveled everything. Imagine her sitting in Montecito or wherever the news first reached her, reading the official communication, feeling the words sink in. Gone. The Duchess of Sussex. Just like that, erased. Overnight, her brand, her identity, the leverage she had counted on, all vaporized. At first, there was silence. But silence in Meghan's case is never empty. It's electric. It's loaded. She reportedly stared at the words, then at the documents, then at the phones in her hand, realizing the breadth of the blow. And for the first time, perhaps, she felt powerless, truly powerless. Hollywood deals. They relied on the Duchess title. Branding? Depended on the name Sussex. Public image? Tied inexorably to the crown she had supposedly stepped away from. The realization must have been staggering. And yet, Meghan's mind didn't stop. Her instincts are sharp, honed from years in front of cameras and navigating high-stakes entertainment circles. While her public face remained calm, her inner strategist immediately began calculating. How could she pivot? How could she salvage the situation? How could she maintain influence without the royal edge she had relied upon for so long? This was also a moment of bitter irony. Meghan had spent years trying to project independence from the royal family, crafting an image of a self-made woman who didn't need palace approval. And yet, in this moment, the very independence she claimed to desire had collided violently with reality. Without the title, the independence she celebrated suddenly felt hollow. The leverage she thought she wielded, the ability to command attention, negotiate deals, maintain relevance, depended entirely on a status she no longer held. There were reportedly conversations, calls, and even meetings in the days following the announcement that painted a picture of Meghan as both shocked and quietly furious. Allies noted a restrained rage, a controlled but undeniable energy, the kind that can either lead to brilliance or disaster. She understood the stakes. She knew she had to act, but every move would now be under scrutiny, not just by Hollywood, but by a public that had watched her every decision for years. And here's the key. Meghan had always thrived on narrative control. Interviews, appearances, social media, all were her tools for shaping perception. But in this case, the narrative had been taken from her. Charles and the palace had not only stripped her of titles, but also of the symbolic power those titles represented. The storyline she had hoped to control, the image of a duchess leveraging her position for influence, was now rewritten without her consent. What's more, the silence of Meghan's response spoke volumes. Those closest to her reportedly noted that she wasn't immediately reacting publicly. There was no statement, no social media post, no dramatic reveal, just quiet, concentrated processing. And for Meghan, silence is a weapon, but it is also a signal. A signal that the situation is serious, that the stakes are high, and that the ground beneath her carefully constructed empire has shifted irrevocably. Consider also the emotional weight of being blindsided. Meghan had likely believed that she and Harry had negotiated a buffer, a safeguard against the monarchy's harshest measures. She may have thought that Hollywood influence, media attention, and her global popularity would provide insulation against the most extreme responses. But she miscalculated. She underestimated the depth of Charles's resolve and the lengths to which he would go to protect the crown's integrity. And that's where tension peaks. For Meghan, shock was quickly transforming into strategy. But strategy now had to be adapted to a completely altered landscape. The rules had changed. Titles that were once her currency were gone. The leverage she wielded in negotiations, in media, in Hollywood, was suddenly weakened. She had to reassess her approach entirely, and quickly. Now ask yourself, what would you do in her position? Would you fight publicly, risking more backlash and scrutiny? Would you retreat quietly, reassessing your next moves behind closed doors? Or would you attempt a bold, unprecedented pivot, leveraging whatever remained of your influence to reclaim power? Meghan's response, in this case, would set the tone for everything that followed, from media narratives to business negotiations to personal relationships within the royal family. And yet, in the midst of her shock and silent plotting, Charles had already moved forward. He had made it clear that the monarchy's priorities were above personal loyalty, above public perception, and certainly above Meghan's ambitions. This wasn't punishment for punishment's sake. It was a strategic assertion of authority. And for Meghan, the reality was stark. She had underestimated both the king's patience and his precision. But Meghan's silence and shock were only the beginning. Because what happened next, the private maneuvering, the subtle negotiations, the attempts to salvage influence, would push both her and Harry into uncharted territory. And the palace knew it. Because the next moves Meghan considered in the wake of losing her title, those private, calculated actions, would set the stage for revelations that shocked the monarchy and the world alike. King Charles's message to the world was more than just a decree. It was a statement, a line drawn in the sand, a warning shot across the bow. When the palace announced that Harry and Meghan were no longer the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, it wasn't simply an administrative update. It was a public assertion of authority, a symbolic act that reinforced the enduring hierarchy of the crown, and a declaration that the monarchy would not be undermined by personal ambition or commercial exploitation. From the very first words of the announcement, the palace emphasized that this decision was about responsibility, not revenge. Titles are not commodities. They are privileges attached to service. And when Meghan allegedly tried to leverage her title for Hollywood advantage, she crossed a boundary that the monarchy could not, and would not, ignore. The messaging was deliberate. Charles wanted the world to understand that this wasn't a private family feud aired in tabloids. This was an institutional assertion. The monarchy's traditions, its values, and its dignity were paramount. Every word in the official statement reinforced the idea that titles are earned, not inherited, and certainly not to be exploited for personal gain. But here's where the drama intensifies. Charles didn't just strip the titles quietly. He framed it publicly, in a way that left no ambiguity. The world was watching, and the world knew precisely why it happened. While Meghan may have believed she could maneuver around the monarchy's authority using her media influence and celebrity status, Charles demonstrated that no amount of Hollywood clout could supersede the weight of the crown. Now consider the layers of irony. Meghan, who has long positioned herself as a modernizer and a disruptor, suddenly found herself the subject of a centuries-old power structure asserting itself. The very establishment she sought to circumvent had reminded her, and the world, that the crown is not just a ceremonial role, It is a moral and symbolic authority that transcends individual ambition. The announcement also carried a psychological weight. It wasn't just a loss of titles. It was a signal to the public and to any who might follow in Meghan's footsteps that the monarchy enforces boundaries. You cannot pick and choose royal privileges. You cannot claim the benefits while rejecting the responsibilities. Charles's framing made this clear. The message was both protective and punitive, defensive of tradition and assertive in power. At the same time, the king's tone contained elements of inevitability and finality. This wasn't a temporary suspension or a negotiated compromise. The titles were permanently removed. The language reinforced permanence. And in doing so, it subtly communicated a lesson in authority that echoed far beyond Harry and Meghan. The monarchy retains ultimate control over its symbols, its brand, and its people. But what's fascinating is how this public statement intersected with the private realm. While the world read the announcement with shock and fascination, inside the palace, this was a meticulously calculated move. Advisors had weighed potential backlash, measured media response, and assessed the impact on public opinion. Charles was not acting impulsively. Every line, every phrase, was designed to maintain control, to assert dominance, and to protect the institution's reputation. And yet, this assertion of authority carried its own drama. The world, especially in the United States, where celebrity power often eclipses institutional hierarchy, reacted in real time. Headlines exploded, social media erupted, and debates raged over whether the king's move was harsh, justified, or both. Meanwhile, inside the royal family, emotions were raw. The tension between duty, personal loyalty, and public perception created fractures that would not easily heal. Now ask yourself, if you were in Meghan's position, facing a carefully crafted public message that simultaneously stripped your identity and reinforced someone else's authority, how would you respond? Publicly? Privately? Strategically? Meghan had always thrived on narrative control. But here, the narrative was controlled by someone else, by Charles. And that loss of narrative power is as critical, if not more, than the loss of the title itself. And here's where the stakes escalate further. Charles's public framing wasn't just about setting boundaries. It was a warning to the broader world. Hollywood deals, media appearances, and personal branding cannot override the monarchy's authority. For Meghan, this wasn't theoretical. It was personal. Every planned move, every pitch, every strategic negotiation she had in mind was now operating under a new constraint. The golden key she had relied on, the Duchess title, was gone, and the palace had made clear that no appeal, no public sentiment, no celebrity influence could restore it. The drama here is layered. Publicly, Meghan and Harry faced scrutiny and speculation. Privately, they were grappling with shock, anger, and the realization that the foundation of their post-royal strategy had been irrevocably altered. And through it all, Charles's message remained firm, controlled, and unmistakable. The monarchy sets the rules, and no one, not even a son or a daughter-in-law, is above them. But the story doesn't end with the announcement. Because Hollywood, the media, and Meghan herself were all watching, calculating, reacting, and strategizing. And what came next, the ripple effects of Charles's public assertion, would be even more dramatic than the initial shock. Hollywood had always been Meghan's second kingdom, and in the wake of Charles's decision, that kingdom suddenly became a minefield. The title that had opened doors, commanded attention, and elevated her projects was gone.